very hard. We always tell her, number one in your life is to be kind. Number two is to be intelligent and thoughtful.
Welcome to the Legacy Project. My name is Jim Copple, president of the Servant Forge Foundation. We're an organization committed to leadership development with a specific focus on service. This podcast and its related activities are about sharing the legacy we have inherited and discussing the legacy we still want to create. Legacy is more than cars, houses, boats, and material possessions that we want to leave to the next generation. Rather, legacy is about core values and beliefs that we inherited from a previous generation. They are the values that shaped us and defined us. Legacy is also about the values we develop or create that can be passed on or shared with the next generation. We will interview people from various backgrounds and walks of life. Some are famous, some, well, maybe not so famous, and others are simply our neighbors, our friends, people who live ordinary lives doing extraordinary things. Become part of this project by being intentional about legacy, more than just memories, but principles that have guided our lives and shaped our decisions. What is the legacy you choose to create? That's what we want to discover. We're fortunate to have with us today Ryan Tritch, who works with Food for the Hungry. He's a partner and a client of ours in our work that we do with Strategic Applications International. Ryan, where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Denver, Colorado, there till I was 3, and then I grew up most of the rest of my life in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Lancaster.
Yeah.
I know Lancaster. I lived in Shippensburg for a while.
Oh, yeah, very close.
Yeah.
Shippensburg University, Kutztown, Millersville, that's where most of my friends went to college.
I almost taught at Shippensburg University.
Oh, yeah, no way.
So, well, we're glad to have you here, and glad to have you in Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, thank you. I've appreciated your hospitality.
Yeah, where we're recording this today. Ryan, this is about legacy, and who are some of the most important influences in your life? Who helped shape or guide you?
Well, you and I were talking a little bit at lunch today. We didn't get, let's say, too deeply into it, but one of them is of course, my dad. Mm-hmm. I think my dad struggled with many of the strictures of being a man in mm-hmm. the United States. Always had to make money, always had to be tough. And I actually saw that break him down quite a bit. And then I saw later in his life, after he got over some of those issues, him kind of recoup. And for the last 5 years of his life, truly kind of feel blessed and happy. Mm-hmm. And so I saw that recovery, and it has actually inspired a great bit of what I have done with my life ever since his passing in 2011. So that would be one person. There's quite a few. One of my favorite poets is Kay Ryan. I don't know mm-hmm. if you've ever read anything by her. She writes very succinct poems, very dense poems. And I remember another a piece that has influenced me. She mentioned that her day job, was teaching rudimentary writing at a community college so that she could free her mind to do the dense work mm-hmm. of writing poetry. And I've always aspired to that, mm-hmm. to be able to do a job that requires all of me, to be able to free my mind up in other spaces.
Going back to your father, just
Sure.
very quickly, are there things that he taught you that you still kind of cling to or hold on? I mean, my father taught me to shake hands, and I can remember distinctly that time when he did that, and we stood up and we had to grip a hand, etc. And I don't shake hands today, that I don't flash back to
really
that experience.
There's a lot of things. I think of the things he didn't teach me. He didn't teach me how to shake a hand. He didn't teach me how to shave. And this one really drove me crazy. He did not teach me how to tie a tie. And so that drove me nuts in college when I had to figure it out by myself in my dorm room. But, I think the one thing he taught me was during his recovery period, he would talk to me a lot about what he was learning. His biggest takeaway that I felt like resonated with how I operated in life was that he said, you'll stop thinking about what people think of you when you realize how little they do. And that stuck with me a lot because I'm an innately, and I don't know where this comes from, competitive person. Mm-hmm. And I have always struggled my whole life comparing myself to another person. It's been actually a very major struggle of mine, ongoing, but it's something that I continue to work on. And he left me, I think, with that. I think he was always that way, looking at the people. He was in finance, looking at the people in sales and how much they were making, looking at the C-level folks and wondering, what kind of influence they had. And I think once he reached that point where he realized, gosh, talking about legacy, right? None of that matters in the end.
Yeah.
It gave him a lot of peace, and I've worked with that message that he passed on to me quite a bit since then.
See, you're relatively young, but have you thought much about your own legacy, what you want to leave behind to another generation? You have a daughter, right?
Yes, my daughter, 5-year-old daughter Ellie, who I love so much. Yeah, I have thought a lot about it. Speaking of where we are, right? We're in Nairobi, Kenya. I know a lot of people that would not even venture to Africa, even coming here for 10 years, but I know a lot of people that would not do it. They are afraid of, I think, seeing how most of the world lives and feeling compelled to do something about it. I have felt strongly since my daughter was born that I've taken lots of pictures here, that I want her to see me going to these places. I want her to feel compelled as well to help others who need it. Beyond that, we always tell my daughter, and we have to live this out, and it's very hard. We always tell her, number one in your life is to be kind. Number two is to be intelligent and thoughtful. She's 5. She doesn't understand that fully. But if you ask her what the number one thing in life is, it's to be kind to others. And that's something I want to pass on to her. Mm-hmm. How am I going to do that? I don't know. I'm still thinking about that. I'm 34. I'm working on that. But it is something I think about every day.
Well, more than likely, you'll probably model it.
Yeah,
she'll see it.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah. But even that's hard, right? I mean, It was easier for my mom to tell me to be nice to somebody when I was in 5th grade than it is when you're an adult and everything becomes complicated, and there are so many other factors in your life. The political atmosphere in the United States, right? It makes it hard sometimes to be kind to our own family members, and so it's. I do worry about the legacy and whether I'm modeling it appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting you brought up sort of the polarization that is in the United States now, or even globally, around politics, and that it somehow becomes so personal. And kindness is difficult. Being generous is difficult.
I realized very quickly there are people in my life that like to call others that see the perspective, in this case, many GOPers, conservatives, evil for what's going on. And I shake at that word. Because I had an experience where I was sitting in DCA airport. This guy next to me, he had a MAGA hat on, red MAGA hat. And he was watching, I don't know what the name of the news station is, but it's Bill O'Reilly's online news station. And I just felt this anger towards this person who I didn't know at all. And this is what I'm talking about, where it's complicated sometimes to be kind. And I remember realizing in that moment this anger and probably hatred I felt for this person next to me. If I had fallen off my stool and broken my leg, he probably would have reached down and helped me. He'd been the first one to pull out his phone and call 911. I don't know that person, and yet I felt this anger. And I began to start talking to others around me about how I felt dialogue was important. And many of them would go back and say, I am somebody who feels persecuted by these people. Why should I be nice to them? And it's been an ongoing conversation in DC since I moved to Phoenix. It's the same type of conversation. I thought it would go away a little bit, moving so far away from DC, but it's not. It's hard. It's hard to model difficult. The kind people we want to be.
Stephen Covey, in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, talks about, in the second habit, living with the end in mind. That imagine people attending your funeral today. What would they say about you? And then project out, if you had the chance, what would you like? If you had 10 years, what would you like them to say about you? What do you think people would say about you today? I don't know if I like this, but I'm going to say it, that I put everything I had into whatever I decided to do. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. I'm still working on that. I also do believe that the majority of people would say that I was kind. I believe a lot of people would say, gosh, he smiled all the time. But I struggle quite a bit. You and I talked a little bit about me struggling with anxiety today. But all the time I'm smiling. I try to be ebullient, excitable.
But I do believe, to the point of your question, that people would say that I'm kind and that I've been a kind-hearted person in my life and that I tried to help others.
Mm-hmm. In your life, do you have anything, any personal possessions, anything that you identify with that you would want to leave behind? For me, I mean, my children come into the house and say, Dad, we want your teapots. Or we want your Bible, or we want this kind of thing. Is there anything that symbolically in your life that you want to leave behind?
To LA specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, books. And I want to leave behind the notion of, and I know this is controversial, but actual hard paper copies of the books.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, I can't read anything on a phone or an iPad. Just the idea of having that with you to write in the margins, to be able to, because my dad wrote in the margins, and I always loved going back and looking at those books and seeing what was in there. He also used cologne samples as bookmarks, so all the books smell really great. It's just a unique thing he did. Did
you do that on purpose?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
He'd spray them and he'd bring them in from Macy's or wherever we were, and he'd stick them in a book. And so every book I have of his has multiple cologne samples in them. And sometimes there's basketball game tickets and all this stuff, so it's kind of fun going through his life.
There's a romantic comedy that was produced several years ago with Amy Adams called Leap Year.
I have not seen it. My wife has seen it. I saw it on our Netflix queue.
Well, it's a fun movie, but in the movie, in an exchange she's having with her fiance, or actually the person she ends up with in a relationship, he asks her the question: if a fire broke out in your house, what is the one thing you would grab in terms of a personal possession? What would you grab?
I know the answer to this one. So, assuming my puppies, my wife, and my daughter all get out, I would grab, there's a little picture of a mouse. And boy, this keeps coming back to my dad. It's very interesting. My dad started writing a book when in the early 90s. And he never finished it. It was always a pet project of his. And he just never finished it. And I think he was, like me, comparing himself to others. The books he was reading had that anxiety of influence, that whole notion of that makes it really hard to do what you want to do. And it was about a mouse in New York City in Grace Church at the Bend in Broadway. It's a real church there. And he was always very inspired by it. So he has this picture of a mouse. And behind it, there was a piece of paper that I found that just has the words patience and fortitude written on it. And I found that just this year when I turned it around. I would grab that. It would be very easy for me to take, and that's what I would take with me.
Mm-hmm. What would that mean to you to have that in your possession?
I've always wanted to be a writer, and I think I struggle the same way he does, which is just saying, "Oh, who's ever going to read this, and why does this matter?" And but there was something in him that was driven to do it. And that I think would lead to great satisfaction, and that patience and fortitude, I think, is what that's about. Is pushing ahead, continuously feeling like you must push ahead, but still being patient for whatever that destination is.
Well, you're a global traveler. You've worked in a variety of positions and been an educator, a teacher. As an observer of the broader culture. What do you think the broader culture thinks of legacy? What is it that it would appear anyway, from your perspective, that they think about when they think about legacy?
Trusts and estates.
Trusts and estates.
I'm talking specifically for the United States, but trusts and estates. It was, it's somewhat disheartening because I feel myself getting pulled towards some of these things. We went and met with a planner, and it was all about here's what you should do to build a trust, and all. And I feel a deep sense of responsibility not to leave my children with financial burdens, but I feel like that is, aside from not leaving them with a burden, I don't feel like leaving them with a ton of money is incredibly important. I think I get that from my mom. My mom says, you're not going to have a cent when I die. You're not going to get anything from me, and I'm fine with that. I think the broader, and I also think it's this, this larger notion of I think when we're young, we feel like possessions are incredibly important. They are what we leave behind. And then the older we get, we feel like it's ideas and memory. And that's what I'm trying to focus on is, despite the anxiety, my throwing myself into my work for the first 5 years of my daughter's life, I think all the time, what's she going to remember about me? How's she going to, even in just these little moments, right? We were having a pillow fight the other day. I knocked her flat off the bed and her legs kicked up in the air and boom, she just went down. And she laughed and had such a great time with it. And I remember walking out and thinking, I hope she remembers that. I hope that's a moment that I leave with her. Because everything else is so uncertain. And yeah, I see the broader culture valuing money, even status, right? The ability to get in.
Or position.
Position, yeah, exactly. Now, I do think having, now 10 years of work experience, I do think leaving a network of authentic relationships is a beautiful thing too, right? Sometimes the greatest things when somebody says, hey, I know your mom, she's wonderful. I know your dad, wow, what a great guy he was. Let me tell you a story about him. Or my brother, who I think I have a twin brother who's in Indiana. He's the reason I'm here. People talk about him as if he walks on water. He's just the most kind heart. He's willing to give the shirt off his back to anybody. I think leaving those kinds of stories and those kinds of authentic relationships is very important.
You mentioned in authentic relationships, for the most part, you described your family. What about outside your family?
For me personally,
yeah.
I kind of grew up with this notion of networking as a schmoozy kind of thing. But since, the last 2 years of my last job and my 1 year here at FH, I've really enjoyed getting to know people at a deeper level. Authentic relationships to me are not based on what you're going to get. It's about getting to know people. And really, that's become ultimately very, very hard, getting to know people. I am burdened every day by 100 emails, just like everybody else is. I'm burdened by bad news, good news flowing in. An authentic relationship to me is just something that's, you just want to get to know somebody. And I truly have, it can be as simple sometimes, and this isn't something related to a legacy, but a really kind and genuine interaction at a drive-through, where you meet somebody who really likes their job and they say, have a good day, and they mean it. But I have not, especially in my early going, been good at building those types of relationships. And I've had to rebuild many of them. Many of the relationships I made in college were gone. And I've had to reach out to a few people in London and a few that are living all over the world to say, hey, I screwed up. I haven't kept in touch with you, and I realize now that matters more than anything else. And so it's that actual human connection, that sharing of stories, that feeling that there's nothing in this for me besides getting to know you.
You work for an organization, Food for the Hungry, which is a philanthropic organization focused on hunger. How does that job and your involvement with them connect to the legacy you want to leave?
It's a very good question. My prior job was a education technology job. I was in sales. I was making really good money, more money than I ever thought I would ever make in my entire life. But I felt, and I was working for a great company too, but I felt ultimately very hollow. I felt like I was traveling to places, meeting people with an end in mind that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And because my brother offered to take me with him to Africa 15 years ago, I thought back on those moments. I began to have dreams about working at a school, Nyaka AIDS Orphan School in Uganda, in our time there, and how I remember those 2 months I was there as the most fulfilling, happy months of my life, despite the fact I had nothing. We had to cook for ourselves. We slept in bug-infested rooms. We didn't know where we were, couldn't speak the language, but something about that felt important to me. And so I sat next to on an airplane. I was heading to do an event with the Minnesota Vikings. I sat on an airplane with Pete Howard, who's the Chief International Operations Officer at FH, and we started swapping stories. And I said, Pete, what you do, I think that's what I want to do. And I said, do you think I have the skill set to make the transition? He said, I don't know. I think you could. And so we kept in touch for about a year and a half. And ultimately, when the opportunity came up to work for Food for the Hungry, I took it. I still, to this day, don't know why I made that leap. I'm following a gut instinct. I don't have experience in this sector, but what I do believe is that I work very hard, and that I work for the right reasons. I do things for the right reasons, and that I'm good at working on teams, and I feel like my heart is in this, even if I'm sometimes lost on how to solve the problems I'm facing. And so, I, as far as legacy, there is this, I think, idea that you don't always pick. The first thing you pick isn't always the best thing for you. The thing that makes you feel fulfilled, makes your heart feel bigger, makes you feel like you're doing good. And so I've skipped around to many different jobs, and this is my latest destination. And I feel like this one's going to stick. Because another thing I want to teach my daughter and leave as a legacy is this idea that we are so globalized at this point. There is no here and there is only here. And we need to all be thinking that way. There is only here. So me coming to Kenya shouldn't be a big deal. It shouldn't be a special thing. This should be, we all have that global perspective. We all have that global kindness.
So in terms of kind of the value base you bring to this position, and the things that you inherited from your family, or from a poet, or other key influential people in your life, when it's all said and done, a commitment to an organization like Food for the Hungry versus a business enterprise that may have necessarily no social impact, that's important to you?
Yeah, it is. It is important to me. I think what you said about the social impact is the key differentiator, right? I think there are a lot of businesses that make great social impact, but it's got to be part of their business plan, and it's got to be very intentional. For me, I think this job offered the opportunity to do both. Right, to work with foundations who are supporting nonprofits like us, to work with businesses who are eager to help people, even if the bottom line is part of the conversation. I believe it should be. That's how you make these types of partnerships sustainable. As far as something that keeps me going on really difficult days, the very famous, very long quote from Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet. The idea of living the answers. I have so many questions in my head every day. And his response to that was, don't seek out the answers right away. Live them. The answers will come. And that is, again, this goes back to the patience and fortitude now that I think about it, right? Just be patient. And I don't know if it's God that brings you the answers, if it is just simple experience and the ability to connect dots. But I've had multiple moments in my life. I would consider sitting on the plane with Pete Howard one of them. A moment where the dots connected, where I felt like there was something I was meant to do and that I had to pursue.
Without sounding overly morbid, one of the questions related to legacy, it is what it is in part that we leave behind. On your tombstone, patience and fortitude?
Patience and, I think that's a good one. I may actually keep that. That might be, it's a lot nicer than some of the things I would write on the Oregon Trail tombstones when I was a kid. So I'd take patience and fortitude over what I used to put on there. I think that's good. I also, I want to put something, I want to put something on there about loving others, but I haven't figured that out yet. Because I've grown And none of this stuff was important to me even 5 years ago. But since I've had my daughter, this is stuff I think about all the time.
Are you a keeper of things, a hoarder? I have a black box that I've had since high school. Inside that black box, I have homecoming memorabilia or a program. I have pictures of girls that I dated. It's just a wide range of things. First time I ever went overseas. I have a passport in there. Do you have anything like? Did you do that?
I grew up in an era where all that stuff got posted, so it's all
electronic.
It's all electronic places. Yeah. I have about 15 CDs from my first trip to Africa. As far as travels, that's what I have kept. But no, I'm not. I wish I was. I wish I had kept more from when I was growing up. So I'm impressed you had that perspective from when you were younger.
Well, when I was younger, we weren't posting.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
But let me follow up on that point. Do you think that's something we're losing in the contemporary culture?
100%.
Is that we depend on electronic social media to store? Every day I get a memory from Facebook.
Well, it's 100, absolutely, especially because I have tremendous neck pain from looking at other people's memories. I wish I just had a box I could open and I could sit there and look at them. It's the same reason I buy or keep all of my actual books. I do not read books on screens because I can't. I want to have that. It's a legacy of having read it, right? To me, I love being able to see that and to be able to go back to it. Yes, it's something we're losing. I feel like the pendulum has swung so far to the side of transparency and, quite frankly, look at me, right? Somebody once said to me, you don't post anything unless you want everybody to see it. And I think that was really key, right? You might want to share it for a good reason, but oftentimes you're just posting it there so that everybody sees it and they say, hey, look at what he or she is doing. And to me, the pictures you talk about are so much more private, right? There's something you keep. There's something you have to intentionally choose to keep. And I feel like we are going to swing back the other direction to holding. My wife, who's a youth director, she bought Polaroid, temporary Polaroid cameras for our youth group celebration. The kids went nuts over them. They couldn't believe that this type of quote unquote technology existed to get an instantaneous, tangible photograph, and they just loved it. So I feel like we will go back. I feel like we've been in a stage of about 30 years of technology increasing so fast that we don't know what to do with it. And now I think we're realizing we have a choice. Yeah.
Well, Ryan, thank you for your time and your participation. This has really been insightful, and appreciate your engagement and your thoughtfulness about creating a legacy that will influence your children and those around you, and the legacy that you'll leave in the workplace, the values that you bring to that. That's going to be very important, I believe, going forward in a world that is, it's an overworked word, materialistic, and things and objects, and a kind of a narcissism that we've created. And I thank you for thinking about legacy with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And if I could add one last final thing, when we, in our world, this development world, we're finding that change happens at the household level. I think, too, the legacy we leave, the social legacy we leave, has to happen at that level too. And we can do the big broad strokes. I think that's very important. But in my neighborhood in Phoenix, we're redoing our backyard, and one of the considerations we have is that we are near an inner city high school. And we're thinking 10 years in the future here, but we want kids to be able to come from there to our yard, to a safe place where they can do work. And more and more, I'm realizing that the divisiveness we have as a country will be healed in the neighborhood. It's not going to be healed by any large movement. It's going to be healed by being kind to each other again. And as far as you had asked before, the legacy, I want to be known as somebody who's neighborly. And that doesn't sound very grand. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think for an individual life, it's the biggest accomplishment that you can have, that somebody will say, he gave me something when I needed it. He helped me when I needed help, and we knew each other.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you added on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
To find out more information about this conversation and other Legacy podcast episodes, go to servantforge.org. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and consider leaving us a review. We want to hear from you. We want to get your ideas and your opinions. I have a new book that corresponds with the Legacy Project titled The Seeker, Bring Me the Horizon. You can find a copy of it on Amazon or your preferred book distributor. The book corresponds closely with these podcasts. The podcast episode was produced by Matt Erickson and edited by Carissa Erickson. The music is by David Hyde. Please look for a new episode of our podcast coming out soon. Remember, you have inherited a great legacy. You have an opportunity to create a great legacy. Engage your past to build a future.